Everyone in the US and good morning to those in Japan. Welcome to the second day of JAS 72's final forum. Very excited to have you here. We're going to be seeing our final three RT presentations today, as well as hearing from our keynote speaker, Secretary Norman Mineta, at the end, so please hang around as we wrap up this year's 72nd conference. Very quickly, I'll go through the schedule. So here in just a moment, we'll begin with the Labor and Work Culture Roundtable with their presentation, followed by a quick break, then the Health and Society Roundtable, and then we'll finally close out with the Environment and Development Roundtable. Each RT should be presenting for roughly an hour with, as it says, about 10 to 15-minute breaks in between. And finally, we'll be closing out with our keynote speech from Secretary Norman Mineta. And then finally, some closing words from the chairs of the 72nd and 73rd conferences. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Carly, who will intro us into the Labor and Work Culture Roundtable. Take it away, Carly.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for that introduction of today's events. I hope you all are excited. We are very excited to have you again. I'm actually going to pass it off to Miriam, who's going to explain a little bit about what the Labor and Work Culture RT is going to do today with you guys.
Hi, hello. Can we start the presentation?
Yes, whenever you're ready, girl.
Okay.
Sorry, can everybody see that fine? Okay, yes. Awesome.
Okay. Hello, and thank you for being here today. We are the Labor and Work Culture through the Lens of Gender Roundtable. We will be presenting on labor and work culture in the context of COVID-19. Next slide, please. Content warning: this presentation will contain sensitive information about controversial topics. The content may be uncomfortable for some. Next slide, please. There are some questions we would like you to consider. Number one, how has the pandemic affected workplaces in the United States and Japan? And number two, how can we create an equal society, and what would that entail? The goal of this presentation is for the audience members to develop empathy and further understand the inequalities that have affected certain groups of individuals. I will pass it on to you, Tana.
Okay, hello everyone. For the kickoff of our presentation, next slide, please. Yes, we would like for the participants in this presentation to take part in a simple activity. We would like participants today to first discuss unreasonable cultures and customs you find in your schools and workspaces or home. The customs and cultures could be anything. One work culture, which I can propose to everyone as a person working at a cram school, which is a kind of a place for students to study for entrance exams in Japan, was the culture that young teachers were not allowed to go home earlier than the senior teachers, regardless of how fast you had your jobs done. This might be a subtle example, but shows a fundamental work culture in Japan to obey the seniors in any context. And I think this is the indirect cause of the various harassments which can be seen in Japan. So enough about my example, but let's take 9 minutes to talk about the issue unreasonable cultures and customs in schools, workspaces, and homes. If time seems to remain, please go further into talking about how those cultures and customs changed or did not change due to the COVID-19. We'll have one person from each group to summarize the discussion they've had in their groups. So if the breakout rooms are ready, please proceed to the allotted breakout rooms. We will post the agenda again in the chat box. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
So who would like to go ahead and answer the question if you think of any?
Yeah, anything is fine. Like, for example, my experience, like my parents, they work really hard. And then when I was really young and they didn't have time to take care of me so much. And then my grandparents had to take care of the children. And I think this is one of the problem, like Japan had to work really long time. And then, yeah, like kind of that's like experience or like yourself or like your parents or like school or yeah, anything like related to work or like related to gender or something. Could you have opinions?
It could be anything. I mean, what culture? One that I can like think of, I don't know, maybe to American delegates. I don't have much experience working in American workplace, but is it common not to like talk specific stuff about how much you're paid, or like if you want some like promotion or pay raise? I mean, I think American people often go ask their like managers or like their like whoever in charge of the amount that you're getting paid to, like, you know, like I'm doing this much, please appreciate me. But in Japan, like it's quite often, you know, you just take what they tell you, stick to that salary and do nothing. But yeah, Nathaniel, please.
Yeah, thank you, Scooter. So I think Scooter raised a really valuable point where in America, it is very uncommon to talk about your salary and what your coworkers are getting paid. So there's been some movements within specific businesses where your salary is disclosed to everybody, but there are also the vast majority of workplaces that tend to keep that a secret. And I think that it is very important to discuss what your coworkers are being paid because for example, if you look at gender inequality, there's a quite documented issue with women being paid significantly less within the United States. And it's not really known because if you don't talk about your salary and you don't talk about how you're compensated for specific services, then you're never really going to know what your colleagues are being compensated with either. So you wouldn't notice a difference. And I think that moving towards a more kind of progressive stance of keeping that transparent and understanding what people are being compensated for and why they're being compensated that amount versus a different amount if you have a lower salary, like why is it lower? Whether it be experience or certification, et cetera, be something that would be really important for people entering the workplace so that they can understand what's valuable to employers and how they can achieve a higher salary. So thanks, Peter, for raising that. That's a really important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you mentioned, I think I know several like, you know, websites or like platforms that where like employees of a certain like company at certain position like can share their like how much they're paid anonymously, which is also like a very good resource, and I think it's a great like step forward where like people can, you know, look at that position and then go look online, and then if they see that, you know, other people are paid higher, then now they have like a not justification, but like still they now know that they should be appreciated more. And I think it's employees' right to like ask to be appreciated for their like job that they do. So yeah, I hope the movement comes along in Japan as well, because I think in Japan it's also quite uncommon to speak about like how much you're paid, even where I work part-time. It's just, you know, part-time job, but like I was strictly told not to disclose how much I get paid. So I think it's a quite unfair and reasonable rule. Any other
Going
in
off
mind?
of that,
Oh yeah, please.
going off of that, I'm not sure how relevant it is, directly relevant it is to the topic, but there's a lot of internships, especially in like the humanities fields in America, where they're unpaid, which I don't know if it's unreasonable or not, because people do get experience from it. I do find that when I'm talking to my friends, I found that it is less common for internships in engineering fields or other STEM fields to be unpaid, whereas there are many humanities internships where many of the best ones are unpaid. So I feel that that could be a limiting factor. Even if you're talented, if you need to balance the job as well, it'll be difficult to get an internship. So I feel like if it could be like equalized among fields somewhat, that could be better.
If I can make a quick comment, I feel like here in Japan we still have like strict dress code for women, and if you work at like corporate job, you have to like wear high heels, whereas men they can wear whatever they want, and I think that's some like one of the cultural practice that's still really deeply we see here in Japan, and also like I feel like I do actually work at local convenience store, and because I don't have like traditional Japanese name, I get a lot of question about my language ability. So like those microaggressions does really have, taking playing out in working settings. And I feel that's not being really acknowledged here in Japan. So I just want to kind of put that out as well.
Does anyone have a comment? Only like 15 seconds.
Okay.
And my story reminded me of my job hunting experience, and there was a social movement. It was not as big as Me Too movement, but Kutu movement in Japan. And the Kutu is basically talking about shoes, and their aim is to like women do not necessarily need to wear high heels during the job hunting or they work. And another story is that when I had a part-time job at the cafe, I was asked to put makeup every day I work at the cafe, while obviously men do not. And their reasoning is that it's a manner to stand in front of our customers to put makeup.
I think like someone can like tell what we talked in the main groups. Like I just like 1 minute or something.
Any volunteers?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Or should I
maybe,
pick?
Yeah, maybe delegates is better. Like, do you have like kind of the issue cannot or something?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like EC. There's no like strict rule, but we've been avoiding.
Or so Chelsea or Shiho is it okay? Or, yeah. What you said, it's totally great.
3 seconds. And no one.
Okay, hi, everybody, welcome back. So, as for the ending of our activity, the first activity we've had, can I have first Nao as the presenter from my group? So I would wish to, if you could summarize the discussion we've had in about 1 minute. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. We were discussing about some unreasonable custom or set to the young people, like freshmen or youth in the company, and they have to like show respect to the elders, and that itself is a good thing, but they have to do that things such as, you know, like taking extra work for free, even if it's not like the optimized case, or like they have to do like a certain customs, like sitting in the furthest seat in the restaurant or sitting in a certain place when they're taking taxi. And well, that is not like, that doesn't really sound reasonable. And Lisa showed us like really good case for like sometimes the work is not reflected accurately to the salary due to the lack of system. But like she spoke up to the manager and fixed it. So she said like sometimes it's important to speak up when there is like those unreasonable customs. And I think we had a very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, yes, we did have a really good discussion. So can we go on to my UCOS group?
Yes, thank you now. So from this group, I would like to pass it on to Takuya, please.
Okay. In workplace, so women should prepare the tea for guests in Japan. It is unreasonable culture in Japan. And in homes, so the father should be the strongest in family. And the same reason, so the oldest boy or son have feel the pressure in the family. And in schools, we mainly discussed about school uniforms. So in Japan, so and America, so the boys should have the short hair, and girls should have tie their hair, and have extra goods. That to follow the school uniforms, rules. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Takuya. I think that was really good examples of the unreasonable things we have in our schools and also like in our homes as well. Thank you. Can we go on to Justin's group?
Great. So for my group, I think we're having Anna present. So if she can come out.
Yeah, so for our group, we mostly focus on the students, and we talk about how professors can at times be more adjustable in terms of giving extensions for papers, and it's really difficult for international students to really go through class sessions anymore because of the global pandemic. And we also talk about change in like how Zoom function, and that made the assignments different. And we talk about how like a lot of assignments became paperless, and it's really difficult for language professors to really grade on the students' ability anymore because of Zoom and the change online. So yeah, I think that's yeah, and it's very hard for most students to focus and get the most out of the class. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think that's a discussion that we couldn't have had 1 year ago, and I think it's really special for us to have that. Yeah, just in this 70-second JASC. So can we go on to Miriam's group?
Yes, I will pass it on to Yano.
We discussed about like 3 examples. Like the one example is like because of the Zoom, there is less, it is becoming difficult to make a difference between the private time and the work time. And the second example is especially in Japan, after work, we have to, like, some people have to go to drink, and the third example was senior have to be respected, or a junior has to respect seniors, like listen to seniors talk, but seniors have to pay for lunch or like dinner for juniors. These are what we discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryu. Yeah, actually, I searched some articles like relating to the drinking customs in Japan. They even have a phrase "nomikai" as like a phrase, and also in English that yeah refers to that custom as well. Yes. So can we go on to Yume's group?
Yes, and sorry, can I pass it on to Cherishi? I'm sorry.
Okay, so in our group, one thing we talked about was how it both in Japan and America, there many companies have a manner to not talk about your salary with each other, which makes it difficult for people to notice whether they're being paid the same amount or less than the coworkers, which could lead to unreasonable pay differences because of gender or skill or maybe negotiation. Another thing that came up is how depending on your name, some people might doubt your language skill, especially if you're mixed race or something, or if you're in a different country, then some people might doubt your language ability and treat you differently. And another thing that came up is, it's been mentioned by other groups too, but dress codes. And we specifically talked about how sometimes women need to wear high heels or makeup, whereas men don't. While the high heel aspect could be solved by remote work, you would still need to wear makeup at home, which could be even more unreasonable.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. That were 3 points that we didn't have in the other groups, and I think it was an wonderful discussion that you had in your group as well. Last but not least, can we have Fabi's group?
Yes, I would like to pass it on to Christine.
Thanks, Fabi. So we started talking about harassment in the workplace, specifically towards like young people, mothers as well. In a way, there's more pressure on mothers in the workplace. I found that conversation really interesting, actually, and it was a problem that was more recognized with like due to COVID-19, and since everyone has been working remotely, there's more, you can visually see the priorities that other people have in their lives just by what's going on in their home. And the example that came up for mothers specifically is if you have children that are going to school at home as well, you have to kind of divide your attention between your work and your child, which I thought was really interesting. And yeah.
Thank you, Christine. You know, I think we can all say that the distance between work and our everyday life has extremely shortened. Well, yeah, thanks to this Zoom situation. I think we can all say about that. I think it was a wonderful discussion as well. So yes, thank you everyone for your opinions. And can we go back to the slide, please? Yes, so to sum up, I think we can see that we do have unreasonable customs and lots of unreasonable cultures in our society. But nevertheless, we can't deny the fact that we have a kind of a sense of contribution to the society as well when we work for it. So this goes down to a fundamental question. Next slide, please. Yes. What do you work for where there are so many unreasonable customs and cultures in our society? The labor and work culture RT focus especially on the unreasonable factors of gender and race. I'll pass it on to Mayuko.
Thank you, Yuta. So from now, we're going to have some presentations. And first, I would like to talk about COVID-19 and labor through the lens of gender, because gender data is so essential to fully understand COVID's transmission and its related impacts on women and girls. Well, COVID-19 is clearly not gender neutral. Well, of course, the virus doesn't specifically target women. However, women have been affected not only because of the disease itself, but also because a lot of them work in jobs which are not secure or protected. Next slide, please. Well, according to the report by McKinsey Global Institute, women make up almost 2/5 of the global labor force, but have suffered more than half of total job losses from this crisis, which means that women are 1.8 times more vulnerable to the pandemic's impact than men. They are likely to be the first to be fired and last to be rehired in the labor market, because a lot of them don't have enforceable contracts. Next slide, please. Well, it is clear that urgent action is needed right now in order to prevent deepening divisions between gender. Well, next slide, please. Well, if we do nothing, women would experience a disproportionate share of job losses from this pandemic, which would slightly reduce the female to male labor force participation rate from 0.63 to 0.61. But if we do take action now, it maximizes the contribution women can make to the global economy, increasing the participation rate to 0.71. Next slide, please. Well, it is also estimated that without action to boost gender parity, it leaves global GDP $1 trillion below where it would be if the COVID-19 had affected both genders equally. And under the Take Action Now scenario, it would lead to a $13 trillion boost to global GDP in that year, which is an 11% increase over the Do Nothing scenario. Well, as is clear from this assumption, it is so important for policymakers to ensure that the gender perspective is not forgotten when it comes to making important decisions during and after the pandemic that will affect the lives of every citizen. And I would like to pass it on to Justin, please.
Thank you, Michael. So now I'd like to talk about the Japanese government's effort in sort of improving the gender equality within the workplace. So first, I want to talk about the term womenomics. The term was coined in by Kathy Matsui to suggest a new movement of supplementing the aging population and the lack of labor force through an increased participation of women. Two objectives were set to improve, which is a lack of female leaders in position and also the lack of childcare capacity for women's freedom and career choice. So on the next slide, I'd like to talk about the specific changes that are happening with the government's effort. The first sort of component is political outreach. As an act of improving women's representation and power, 5 women have joined Abe's cabinet as ministers in 2015, which unfortunately has decreased to only 1 minister in 2020. And there's also only 2 total officials involved in the current cabinet, which shows a recent trend counteractive to the original claim made by womenomics. Another sort of component is the governmental policies. For example, in the revised Labor Contract Act in 2013, it introduced a mechanism that converts fixed-term labor contracts into open-ended labor contracts. As before, it was mentioned that women are sort of vulnerable to the fixed-term labor contracts. And this is sort of to ensure that there's fair termination of part-time contracts, which the part-time labor force is held 70% by women. Other acts like the National Pension Act make it possible to expand the scope of the coverage of pension and health insurance, and it helps improve the benefits of part-time labor contracts. Another component is sort of the professional development side. So the government has been heavily involved in sort of professional improvement in the upcoming generations. They've set a standard for 30% of all leadership positions to be held by women in 2030. An example of this change is sort of the educational institutions changing. For example, Kyushu University has been the forefront of the change as they have introduced international recruitment of female researchers. Since 2009, the ratio of female faculty members has steadily increased from 177 to 320, not just due to the 40 women recruited through the quota system, but also changing sort of attitudes and approaches across the entire university. So on the next slide, I'd like to talk about what is asked from these companies to help contribute to the awareness of gender equality as well. So this is sort of the step involved. The government has been promoting educational programs and self-regulatory systems that help firms avoid female discrimination. They've been providing legal guidelines on equality of wage, as well as work-life balance for women who are heavily involved in household responsibilities. The steps involved here are from the act and promotion of women's participation and advancement in the workplace. And it's an active action plan that has been provided for companies to follow. And through this process, the government hopes to promote a voluntary attitude of firms to offer a fair working environment. Now I'd like to pass it on to Miriam to talk about the issue of race.
I will be speaking on race, ethnicity, gender, and inequalities in the United States during the pandemic. COVID has become another nightmare for many minorities. The pandemic has sprung up many issues that have been overlooked for many years in these communities. There are components that have put racial and ethnic minority communities at a high risk from dying of COVID-19. Some components that have increased the risk of getting sick or dying from COVID-19 are discrimination, healthcare, jobs, living conditions, and educational and income gaps. The first factor is discrimination. Even during a pandemic, discrimination within the healthcare system is still prominent. This is shown with the lack of COVID-19 testing sites in these communities. During the COVID-19 in the United States, there has been prejudice, hatred, and discrimination expressed on social media towards Asian Americans, especially towards Chinese Americans. The second factor is healthcare. People in these minority communities are less likely to have insurance. The lack of healthcare goes beyond not just having access, but also language barriers, lack of transportations. They can't take time off work and cultural differences. The third factor is jobs. Minority groups make up a large portion of essential workers, which makes them more susceptible to get COVID. The fourth factor is living conditions. Some minorities live in crowded households, which prevent them from following safety protocol. Also, due to the disproportionate unemployment rates during COVID, many of these minorities were at a great risk of eviction, homelessness, or even overcrowded. The final factor is educational and income gaps. Resources for a better education are low in many of these communities. The level of education they are getting limits the jobs they will be qualified to do in the future, which leads to minority groups to get lower paying and unstable jobs. People that have limited job qualifications cannot afford to take time off work, take sick days because money will become an issue. Next slide, please. Here's a graph of unemployment rates by gender and race ethnicity from February to June of 2020. Overall, males have a less unemployment rate than females. In the beginning, females have lower rates of unemployment while males have increased, but by April, females surpassed the rate of males' unemployment. Although males as a whole have lower unemployment rates than females, Latino and Black men have had higher rates of unemployment than white men. Moving on to the female graph, there is a higher disadvantage for women of color. We see that Latina women have higher unemployment rates, followed by Black women being the second highest unemployment rate. In contrast, women had the lowest unemployment rate out of the three. Next slide, please. Due to the pandemic, many were struggling economically. Looking at the graph, we can see that Black and Latinx people were at a greater percentage of not being able to pay necessities. They had all their savings and/or took out loans. The economical hardship among Black and Latinx are more than twice as high than whites. I will pass it on to Yume.
Thank you. I will talk about foreign laborers in Japanese work industry. As you know, Japan has the highest proportion of elderly citizens in any other country in the world. Under the Abe administration, the government urged to increase the number of foreign workers to compensate for the decrease of working age population. As a result, the number of foreign laborers has reached 1.7 million until 2019. As you can see from the graph, the percentage of foreign population has reached about 2% in 2018. So we need to look carefully about the trend of Japanese governmental policy toward foreign laborers. It represents one of the vital streams of working industry in Japan. Next slide, please. I couldn't find the translation into English, but this image showed the amendments the immigration control law started from April last year. It means the Japanese government started to accept the unskilled workers and semi-skilled workers from South Asian countries. 2 of the new sections were established. In the first one, named 特定技能1号, 14 fields of work industry which were recognized the lack of workers accept foreign laborers with a 5-year limitation. The foreign workers are required to pass the exam both for work knowledge and Japanese skill beforehand. Moreover, they cannot bring their families. The another one is named 特定技能2号. In order to get that qualification, foreign workers need to have high skills and knowledge. There is no limitation to stay in Japan, and they can bring their families too. However, the number of workers is still little, and it's limited compared to the first one. It is important to warn that any foreigners who are working in Japan on training visas that don't allow them to switch jobs even they are abused or unpaid. Yeah, next slide, please. I have one quick question that I would like you to think of. Is increasing the number of foreign workers the best solution in the long run? Yeah. Next slide, please. I have arguments there. As we mentioned before, Japan has vivid gender inequality. So it's the increasing of women workers should be first prioritized before relying on foreign laborers. There is an impact on the labor industry by extending the working age for the elderly too. Also, in the world scale, it is broadly said that the job replacements by AI will happen in many work fields. A scholar in Oxford University made a conclusion that 47% of all jobs now will be eliminated by AI within 20 years, especially in unskilled jobs. In reality, the environment surrounding foreign laborers is far from ideal. Due to their lack of Japanese skills, they can't socialize the communities or get social support such as healthcare and social care, so security care. On the other hand, there is a lack of environmental and communal support, empathy, or educational opportunities toward foreigners too. If Japan will keep opening the door for foreign laborers, Japan will urgently need to make a supportive environment and take responsibility for human rights for foreign workers. I think when we think of foreign laborers in Japan, it also means to think of the future society in Japan. Yeah, thank you. I will pass it on to Fabi.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. So now I will talk about how COVID-19 changed work culture in America and Japan. So beginning with America, overall increased remote working culture has a more positive reputation than we give it credit for. Apologies. For example, 61% of Americans say they enjoy working from home. 59% feel more comfortable working from home than office, and 49% say they're more productive. Post-pandemic, 75% of adults who work remotely say they would like to do so at least 1 to 2 days a week, while 32% would work from home every day if possible. The coronavirus pandemic has created and emphasized intertwined healthcare crises that reveal and compound deep underlying problems in the healthcare system of the United States. Healthcare is intertwined with employment in the US. A sudden surge in unemployment, exceeding 20 million workers, has caused many Americans to lose employer-sponsored insurance. Healthcare has always been an ongoing debate in the US in regards to universal healthcare, but the pandemic is causing many to question the efficiency and quality of US healthcare system, as many Americans never visited the hospital to begin with, but now they will be less likely to seek the care that they need. Declines in demand for routine services have reduced providers' revenue. Office-based practices had reductions of 60% in visit volumes in the first months of the crisis, and hospitals will lose an estimated $323.1 billion in 2020. Employment in the healthcare system is down by more than 1 million jobs into the month of May in the United States. America will also see an increase in activism. People are very attentive to the news, and as a result of this economic crisis, activism has increased across the country, especially in regards to racial justice and systemic oppression. Particularly dealing with employment, this pandemic has left so many unemployed, uninsured, and in a financial crisis, and people are more informed and involved than ever. There's a lot of anger about the injustices and lack of government aid during this pandemic. America will also see an increase in virtual engagement. The transition can strain professional connections. Nearly half of newly remote workers say that working from home has negatively affected their sense of belonging. But experienced remote workers show us that connectedness can improve over time. And that's kind of what we're seeing here as we continue into this pandemic for close to a year. So now I will talk about how COVID-19 changed work culture in Japan. So Japan will see an increase in family involvement. Working from home pushes workers to think about how they spend their time. At home, there's often the option of doing housework or childcare, forcing workers to budget their time on task. This flexibility has the added benefit of making it easier for parents to take care of kids while holding down full-time jobs, which might help increase the country's chronically low fertility rate. Finally, working from home saves on commuting time. The average time spent each day on household chores for a weekday by Japanese couples is 263 minutes for the wife compared with 37 minutes for the husband, according to a survey conducted by the National Institute of Population and Social Security Research. Women have typically shouldered responsibilities for both work and home. Therefore, we can see a lot of family changes that might be perpetuated by the pandemic, down to how much time men and women spend doing chores in comparison to each other. Japan will also see a better work-life balance. There will be a decrease in long working hours in the office, which is prominent in Japanese culture. Working from home can encourage a culture of productivity. It can push managers to measure work not by the number of hours, but by the number of tasks an employee logs in a chair, by the number of tasks that the workers complete in a given time. That in turn encourages managers to think carefully about which objectives are actually important in order to assign the tasks. Japan will also see an increase in virtual engagement. So more than 60% of Japanese workers say they want to continue working from home after the pandemic. And several big electronic companies and financial companies have declared that some remote work will continue for the foreseeable future. Japan will also see lower unemployment rates. So the March unemployment rate in Japan was 2.5%, only 0.1% higher than in February. This may not reflect full impact to employment as Japan's COVID-19 infection cases only started to accelerate in late March and early April. However, and more importantly, Japan's labor culture is such that lifetime employment with low turnover is the norm. So layoffs are uncommon. We can expect Japan to have lower unemployment rates than other developed countries, in particular, the US. In a survey of more than 10,000 Japanese businesses, more than 63% projected that COVID-19 would have a negative impact on business performance. But going online and remote working is creating opportunities for some businesses and forcing reflection on Japan's long-hour working culture. Thank you, and I will now pass it on to Justin.
Thank you, Fabi. So now as a closing remark, we would like to conduct another set of discussion in the breakout rooms given the information presented in the slides today. So the questions to consider are, how can we become more aware of our internal biases, and what steps do we need to take as a society to address racial and gender inequality? These can be within the context of the workplace or outside the workplace that can influence societal approaches overall. For example, the perception and treatment of foreign workers in Japan mentioned in the slides is an example entry point for a conversation. So if we can sort of assign breakout rooms right now, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Can we start the discussion? Like, yeah, anything it's fine. I think it's we gonna talk the first question. How can we become more aware of our internal biases for like racial inequality or like gender inequality or other inequality too? Yeah. Do you have some ideas?
I can't really think of how to, like, in an instant, but I can talk about like some cases that I realized I had like internal bias that might help. But once I was trying to move a fridge out of my apartment to, I mean, it was like a dorm, you know, moving out and then going to another dorm, and then I had like this gigantic fridge that I had to take out. And then I called some friends over to like help me out, like, you know, yeah, to carry the fridge onto like this cart and then like push it and then, you know, install it into the new apartment. But I realized, you know, after like 3-4 calls, like I've realized I've only picked like male friends without noticing, although I had like many, you know, a few more friends on campus who are, I think, totally capable of, you know, carrying this, you know, tiny, not that tiny, but still it's a like a single, you know, person use, you know, fridge, so not that big. So like I really, you know, felt, I don't know like what kind of feeling it went through me, but like I was so ashamed of myself that like I totally, you know, put that gender bias on like the people I picked to call on. So I don't know what made me possible to like realize that, you know, bias by myself, but maybe try to question like your like the reasons of your action. Like I mean, I was like fortunate to be able to realize that, but like sometimes people just don't realize it. So maybe like just in case, every time you do something or like pick someone, you know, or say something to others, if you have like, you know, enough room to like think about your action, maybe think why you picked that person, why you doing this to that person. That might help, I guess.
I think like to be aware of internal bias is something that you can't do by yourself. I think you have to be with other people, especially with people who are different from you. And I think we all have that responsibility to put yourselves in different situations and with different people and just educate ourselves. I think that's one of the most effective ways. But I think that especially from like moving on from this point, I think diversity and inclusion will be really important concept. And I think that whether that's, you know, having training sessions for employees at a company or putting that specific curriculum in a school system, I think it all comes from education, I think.
This might not be the fundamental solution, but in my case, I am taking a seminar regarding gender studies and social movements. And as part of our assignments, we were told to do the test that I just sent on the chat, And there are a lot of tests that you can take, such as skin tones and weights and religions, sexuality, and it could identify how much you associate certain words with each other. For the gender test, it makes you classify or identify work and women, men and home. And by clicking, by looking at how much time you consume to click on that keywords, it kind of mechanically calculate how much you associate those words within your internal conceptions. So if you have time, I really recommend this test.
Is it okay if I jump in?
Of course. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So one thing I think about with internal bias and kind of doing inclusion type training is a lot of times we don't really want to address it because we just as people like to think that we're good people, and we do good things, but sometimes unconsciously, we'll show bias. And so I think one thing that I've run into a lot, especially on the internet, is exercises where, people will be in classroom or professional settings, and then they just will simplify those biases by like picking a trait. So for instance, like eye color or hair color, and then, practicing, segregation and discrimination that way. And I think that sort of helps make people aware of the situation that, because you might identify with a trait, you're unconsciously, participating in behaviors that are not necessarily good ones. And so I think a good example is, I think the lady's name is like Jane Elliott or something, but she's a school teacher in the United States who did experiments, I think as far back as the 60s and 70s, where she would take school children and separate them by blue eyes and brown eyes, and, one day treat the brown-eyed people badly and the blue-eyed people better and give them privileges, and then switch it the next day. And so I think, while, feeling that sense of, stimulated or simulated discrimination sucks, I think it helps because it reduces the complexity and then kind of shows you this is how people, with experiencing real life discrimination feel.
Yeah, thank you so much for amazing comment. Yeah. Do you have opinion, Sachi or Kenta?
I think in my case, like exposing myself to other cultures is one way of realizing internal biases, because United States, I go to the college in the United States, and I exposing myself to American culture, I realized that Japan is kind of there's kind of sexism, and compared to the situation in the United States, I think women is still underrepresented in Japanese society. So, but before going to the United States, I kind of used to take it for granted, the situation. So exposing myself to other cultures is very important to realize my internal biases. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, if we would like to move to the second question, it's also welcome to talk. Yeah, it's like I also think like I'm volunteering in the night schools right now in Japan, and then also it's like it's brought me so many like views for the education, and then in there like they like a lot of like Korean Japanese, they really like studied for like from like hiragana in Japanese, and also like they're like 57 years old, like more than like 60 or like 55 years old, they studied for like the finishings for the junior high school, and for like the 65 years old women, like the Korean women, they studied for they are in the high school right now, and then it's like changed my mind towards the education a little bit. And then I think like I knew that like we have a lot of Korean Japanese as well in Japan, but I didn't realize like I live really close to them, and I didn't have so much contact with them as well. So I think it's also like yeah, Sachi said, we need to like expose myself in that environment. I think like around me we have a lot of like foreigners, also like yeah, Korean, Japanese, or like other like foreign residents too. So yeah, this is, I really think, yeah, these days. Yeah. Sorry, can someone say like about discussion, like summaries?
So I think everyone's trickling back in. If we can have, if we can start with Utah's group to sort of present what they discussed, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Justin. So for our group, can we have Michael to present what kind of discussion we've had?
Yeah, so to talk about the first questions to how we can become more aware of our internal biases, a few interesting notes came up. For one, someone mentioned something like an internal bias test to help us become aware of like how we view people different from us and how we could reconcile those differences. Also, to recognize racial biases of the past. In the US, we have a very like racially tense society, and that goes further back because the US has such a tense history of racial divisions. So we felt like something like teaching students in high school and college about these racial divisions could help us become more aware of our internal biases. And to become more, to address racial and gender inequality in society, we felt that education was a very important way to address this, i.e. to teach future generations why having certain biases is bad, to encourage discussion between people of different backgrounds, of different cultures. It's very important to humanize other people. And we believe that that would help address inequality in race and gender.
Right, thank you. So sort of the use of education and sort of deconstructing the biases we have right now. That's a very interesting point. Now I'd like to pass it on to Mayuko's group, I believe.
So from my group, may I ask Gio, please?
So for our group, we mainly talk about the first question. Yeah, as Kerry mentioned, like I think the best way to be aware of our internal biases is to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And I think if we do that, it will allow us to become more open-minded and recognize our biases. And I think also Kerry yeah, she provided a good example. What was it?
Sure. Yeah. In the coronavirus, I read some articles about how in Japan, in some couples now working both from home, the husband came to realize how much work the woman or the wife was doing, because they were now in that setting and they were kind of putting themselves in their shoes. And although although it took a coronavirus crisis to have that situation come about, I thought we could, take our own initiative and start, looking around us and making ourselves more aware of how other people's lives are and how the systems that we move through affect that. Thank you, Gio.
Right, thank you. So sort of the awareness as a tool to sort of be more understanding of the other perspective. I think we're sort of short on time, so if everyone can sort of transition quicker, sorry, that would be wonderful. So from my group, we have Keisuke presenting.
Yeah, we have discussed how women in work domain are treated differently than compared to the men. And then we talked about the one story, this is actually about my mom, but my mom working in the financial, domain in Japan. And then, but, when I actually, tell my friend about that, they automatically assume my mom is just simply working just a simple job, like serving the tea or serving the coffee, whatever at the office. But she's actually doing not that kind of thing. She's actually doing the research and that kind of stuff. But they automatically assume that she's doing that that kind of simple job. Or for those of you in Japan, they are called OL ladies, and then that kind of stuff. So this is actually reflect the internal biases within the Japan. And also we discuss about women in the STEM field. We actually label them as especially in Japan, we actually label them as rikejo, and then we actually regard those women in the STEM field as sacred or special figure in the STEM field, but which is supposed to be not women in STEM field. It's just a normal stuff, but we weirdly label in that way. This also reflects the internal biases within Japan, and also career path itself for women is different. We often say the logics if you want to pursue the career, maybe the giving a birth of a child is not the great option to you. This is disgusting. I'm sorry, weird. This is not be that kind of topic. So we discuss about those kind of things as a example of internal biases within Japan.
Great, thank you. So sort of the abnormal labeling based on people's backgrounds. I'm gonna quickly pass it off to Miriam's group.
Yeah, I would like to pass it on to Rika.
Okay. So in our group we discussed it's kind of similar to what Gio's group discussed, the importance of being aware of what's going on to people outside of your community, to realize your internal bias. And also we talked about Japanese business culture, which is kind of sexist. Women have to serve tea. Yeah. So some people in our group were kind of shocked, and I'm kind of shocked as well. Yes, that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Yume's group?
Yeah, sorry, we couldn't decide, but may I pass it on to Sachi? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, so for our group, we mainly discussed the first question, and we discussed the importance of education, and also someone introduces a bias test that we can mechanically assess our internal bias by using some sort of a device, the system. And also it's my opinion, but we discussed the importance of exposing ourselves to other cultures, because exposing ourselves to other cultures and looking at my country from different points of view, it's very effective to realize our own internal biases. So interacting with other cultures is also one way to be more aware of internal biases. Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Last but not least, Fabi's group.
I would like to pass it to Rico.
Yeah, so like our group also used up the time by discussing the first question, how to become aware of our biases. And yeah, so like for the method, I think most of people like said this, but like having open-minded and gaining enough knowledge to like kind of make judgment, and also separating the idea and the person's personality when telling them out that they are biased. And then the subject like went on to how like the difficulty of calling others that they're biased, because like they sometimes lacked enough knowledge to not actually realize that they are biased. And at the same time, you can ourselves can also be lacking knowledge to say that someone is biased, because like by telling them, you can just be fitting someone else into your own bias. And then like there was another opinion that like all of us has some kind of bias, and that our opinion is also like kind of just reflecting what our bias is, so everything becomes kind of relative. And then we were running out of time, but one of the alumni, I think the listeners were trying to say that there were two types of biases. One was the absolute bias, and then the second was a subjective bias. And this, I think he was trying to say that the second one was the one which tend to cause problems. But we kind of went off while he was talking, so I'm not sure if I got this. That's all.
Thank you. So as we sort of move on, it'd be wonderful if you all can sort of consider the discussions we had and sort of your workplace or your academic environment. So that's all from the labor presentation. I'm sorry for going over a bit. Thank you.
Great work, Labor and Work Culture RT. That was a wonderful presentation. Now we will be taking a 10-minute break. So please do get up and stretch, maybe walk around, grab some water, and we will be back starting at, let's see, that would be 7:22. No, weird time. See you all soon. All right, if everyone can start turning their cameras back on, we'll go ahead and move on to our next roundtable presentation. Give everyone just a minute here. All right, so now we're going to begin the Health and Society Roundtable's presentation. So I'm going to hand it off to Emily to kick us off.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Chris, for the introduction. So we're going to have conversation about COVID-19, and Audrey will give a explanation as to what the activity will be. So Audrey, if you could take it over, please.
Yes. Okay. So hello, everyone. We are the Health and Society Roundtable, and I think we can all agree that it has been a pretty significant year for health and society specifically. For our final forum, we wanted to give everyone the chance to discuss the coronavirus and its impact on society, maybe on a slightly more informal or personal level than the incredible gender and workforce roundtable that we just did. Basically, our timeline is we're going to split into 5 breakout rooms, and then another 6th group of some delegates will stay in the main room. Alumni and guests are welcome to go into the breakout rooms or stay in the main room for this discussion there. It'll be all kind of basically the same discussion. Each of the 6 groups can discuss on the broad questions we have designed, which all focus on the societal impact from the coronavirus, which we'll also send into the chat so that everybody has them. Additionally, each group can think about COVID-19 and its impact on these 6 facets of society. So each group will be focusing on one of these specifically. Each group will have an RT member in it who can give more details on that. We chose these societal aspects because they are personally interesting to us, and we thought it would help vary the discussion results if we considered different factors in each room. After discussing for about half an hour, we will come back to the main room and the groups will debrief as per normal. And then, pending on time, we thought it would be interesting to give our guests and alumni a chance to share their own perspective on the discussions they participated in, or more broadly on COVID-19, perhaps from their more experienced or more adult perspective. So now we will be moving to the breakout rooms, and thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Okay, hello everyone. Hi. So as Audrey kind of had explained, we're gonna have like a couple set of questions. Before we start the activity, I was hoping if we could do a short, brief like introduction to kind of like, introduce ourselves to alumni, but I'm seeing we don't have any alumni here, so maybe we can just start it off by kind of giving us our perspective on coronavirus. And I'm gonna type out the question in a chat box. So in this group, if you guys can like pull up this document, you can see that our group will be specifically focused on cultural perspective, and to kind of like provide context, we had a couple articles that summarize the cultural conduct regarding the coronavirus. And one of the example was how mask wearing can be really different from culture to culture. And here in Japan, there was this, so back in like April, like Uniqlo kind of like roll around this new line of mask, and there were a huge line, and it kind of goes to show like how mask wearing was, part of our culture, whereas in the United States, just wearing a mask can be like politicized. So from like those perspective, we want to like have you guys a conversation about COVID with regard to culture. And I think do you guys get a question? I will type that in as well. But the first question that we want you guys to kind of think is, sorry, I'm just pulling the question. Okay. The first question is, what does this pandemic reveal about health and society? It could be anything, but if you can like talk from like cultural perspective, that would be wonderful. So yeah, the floor is all yours. Just feel free to jump in.
I think in the United States, what this pandemic has really revealed is just how deep the suspicion goes towards just the health industry in general. Even in places where there are massive amounts of cases of coronavirus, those tend to be also the ones that are the most against a lot of the health regulations. And it's just very revealing that the people who need the help the most are also the ones that have been the most convinced against it.
I can think of like two different topics. So the first is it's not really related to this like the mask topic. So so what I found is like how the artists or those who are engaged in art, looking music or whatever, these kind of business are vulnerable in these kind of situations, as like they're not protected at all. So I could see some mechanical measure like done by them. And another topic is that how like the discrimination against like those who are affected by the coronavirus is really different from region to region, especially in like the countryside. because I am from Fukushima and I've been back to my parents' house for, I don't know, like for 6 months or so, and I could see some atmosphere there to reject people even from Tokyo, and it was of course foreigners like there, because so like that is absolutely the same thing happened right after the end, the earthquake, and those who were in Fukushima had to evacuate to another prefecture, but like still like they had to face some like severe discrimination, but like the same thing happened in Fukushima as well, like that, them rejecting people from outside. So so like they didn't learn a lesson. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I could see.
Any other thought?
I felt like before, compared to the before the coronavirus happened, I think there's more people who decided to try like committed suicide. So there have been like increasing number of people who committed suicide. So I think it's one of the examples to talk about the changement happening the coronavirus in terms of health. And I think this kind of consequences also related to the one of the industry that has been cut by the COVID infection effects. So my dad is actually engaged in like the third sector of industry. It's the theater kind of thing. So because my dad worked at the industry and he couldn't show the performance on the theater, so my dad kind of lost his job. And then I think this kind of like arts and performances industry had been cut it off at the very first because of the COVID effect. So I think this kind of this kind of like enjoyment for the people would actually need for those who have been suffering from every single days. So I think it's also this effect's gonna related to the health for people who kind of felt lost about and trying to do suicide. So yeah, that's what I thought. I think what I thought during the COVID-19 is that it's like I also think like it's like I don't want to get coronavirus, but also like I don't want to like get hurt or criticized from others. I think this is more like scared of like criticizing or like scared by others. It's more like dangerous, like more I don't want to get more than like getting coronavirus. Like I also working at the guest house, but also like they are really scared to like if they get the infection and then if the disinformation spreading out and then it will last like at least like 1 hour, like the like commenting or by the like the SNS or something. So it's also like I could see the collectivist country, like everyone have to wear the mask and everyone have to do the same things, and also if like we don't, and then they get hurt, like get criticized a lot from like SNS or like just like no name exactly like autonomy, and then yeah, I was scared in this social like environment or like atmosphere too.
I agree. And this is sort of similar to that, but sort of in a different sense. But I think culture, like with SNS and stuff, from after the pandemic, people being stuck
a lot of times at home have sort of left them to only have SNS and like the internet to look to. So they can be, a lot of people are more judgmental and quick. This is sort of going off of the discussion we had in the previous RT group, but like quick to be biased against other people without knowing their full situation. So like I've seen people post pictures where they're like with a group of people and not wearing masks, and people will go after them and say like, delete this, like you're a terrible person for not wearing a mask, even though they don't know the full context and they don't know if that picture was really old and they were like remembering that picture that day, or if it's their family and like some kind of situation where they've been living with people for a long time. So it's, people have been more critical of others too, which is another reason to be like afraid of criticism, and you're afraid of every single thing that you do because people might just attack you for not understanding your situation.
So my comment is similar to what Ginta mentioned, but I think the pandemic has kind of shown how mean or cruel people can be towards others. And the reason why I say so is because of my experience, and because of the story that I heard from my parents that live in a rural neighborhood in Japan. So like in my neighborhood, there were like several cases where someone got COVID, and yeah, and after those people got COVID, I heard that like they were throwing rocks by like strangers, or their like car window was shattered and stuff, and because of those kind of things, they had to move to a different place. And because that kind of multiple kind of times like that kind of things happen, and because that kind of discrimination towards people who got COVID is becoming like kind of apparent. My kind of parents didn't want me to come back to Japan, so I was like studying abroad during that time because they felt that they would receive the same treatment. And like, to be honest, I was kind of really sad that people can act like that, and at the same time I like understand that when we face things that are uncertain or like we don't know how to deal with, we tend to act aggressively. Yeah, so like, yeah, I don't know where my comment is going, but yeah, that's what I felt. I think that people can be really mean to others if they like pressure.
Yeah, I guess you guys brought up a really nice point, and COVID definitely revealed animosity toward like people who have COVID, and also like some certain like people from certain culture like Asian Americans suffering discrimination because of that. But I kind of want to extend a conversation to policy that each government is taking, and I want you guys to kind of share what were some like policy that you thought kind of like help contain spread of the virus, or maybe some policies that they could improve. So if you guys have any thought on that, it will be wonderful if you guys could share that.
I think I want to talk about like GoTo campaign in Japan. I think in the like especially like I'm skeptical of GoTo Eat campaign because they.
Sorry to like interject, but maybe could you like provide some context about like GoTo campaign?
Yes. And the GoTo campaign in the like the big, like especially in the only like big city, they have like, then we can in the customer can go to the like the restaurant, and the lunch time we can get like 500 yen, and then the dinner time we can get like 1,000 yen. And then when we eat, like, yeah, when we go just like go to the just restaurant, which like relate, which like relate, but the restaurant is regulated actually, and then we can like local place, they don't have this restaurant which we can get this and those money, and then just like regulated on the big city or like really like chain restaurant. So I think that's like makes some like inequality between the big city and rural area, and also it's the big restaurant and like local restaurant. I think like this governmental policy ignores the local places, like local restaurants, and especially in the like Fukuoka in my city, like we only use in the Fukuoka city, inside in the city, or like only the big city, and then after, like out of those cities, they don't have those restaurants we can get the discount. So I think like many people want to go to those like big restaurants only, and then those like local restaurant doesn't get the discount or doesn't get like anything from those policies. So I don't know, it's made some like inequality between the people, also people where do they live, and also like in the restaurant, it's where it's like small or located in like city or not.
I don't know, speaking of the go-to campaign, I mean, I, for one, was the skeptics, right? I mean, who would think about, encouraging people to go elsewhere, eat with people, travel with people? That's like, the opposite of virus, like prevention, like spread prevention. But in hindsight, I mean, it's still going on. Like we don't know the total consequences of it, but I mean, I just know so many people in like, this restaurant business or, hotel business that have benefited from it. And then frankly, I mean, it's not like life-saving. They're still like in short of the revenue that they get back in the normalcy, but still it's helping them. So in that sense, I started to, appreciate the go-to campaign and to some extent, but at the same time, Japan, if you look at the graph, it's definitely on the third wave. It's like the number of positive cases per day is going up day by day, which is also coincided with the like introduction of go-to campaign. So I mean, I don't know how much correlation or like cause and effect it has, but there's also some doubt in me. So I don't know. I really can't judge as of right now, but I think those are the positive and negatives that came out from the go-to campaign that, yeah, you guys mentioned.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the go-to campaign. It's basically like a monetary incentivize to encourage people to go to like suburb area to kind of like revitalize their economy. That is one policy that Japanese government is initiating. But I would appreciate it if some of Middle East could provide some policies that's been taking place in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I live in the state of New York in the United States, and it's now known as kind of like the most strict state for COVID regulations because it was the site of the first major outbreak in April in the spring. And it is really interesting because I live in a pretty rural area, a very conservative area, and most of the people here don't agree with and don't want to comply with the regulations, such as wearing a mask that covers your entire nose and mouth. And actually, I think it was last Friday, because the cases are rising, the Governor Cuomo has a new regulation that I thought wasn't really that strict, but it's interesting because restaurants and bars have to close at 10 p.m. And I think no more than 10 people can gather in an indoor space. And I think restaurants can still do takeout after 10, but they can't have indoor seating. And I know that there's been a lot of people frustrated about that. Although I think what I appreciate about it is I don't think the only reason that they did it was because we're seeing a rise in cases. I think that part of it as well is that there's a group of scientists and specialists that the government in New York is consulting, and they're looking and seeing, where are the coronavirus cases coming from? Is it college students going to bars late at night? Yes. And so we close the bars at night, and that kind of thing. So I guess it's a really interesting dynamic to be in a place where the regulations do seem to be pretty much based on science and for the good of public health. But at the same time, it seems like at every turn, there's someone in the grocery store without a mask on, or there's someone who is complaining. And of course, it does hurt businesses, and it does hurt a lot of people financially and socially. And there's no doubt about that. And I think that we should have more support for that. But that's what I would like to see. I would like to see regulations that protect public health and regulations and policies that help businesses and people who have lost their jobs in the meantime when they can't work.
Just to follow up on that real quick. I think one of the biggest problems that across the board the United States faces with any sort of regulation is the fact that it isn't consistent, and that's what's harming businesses the most. So because all of those regulations are decided on a state-by-state basis, you end up with a lot of small businesses suffering and going bankrupt because they didn't close soon enough, or they tried to reopen too soon, or things like that. And the effort and money that it takes to do a total shutdown or to do a partial reopen is just not enough or is too much for small businesses to bear. I don't have the stats in front of me, and I could definitely see if I can find it, but like billionaires and companies like Amazon are the ones who are actually making a profit off of the pandemic, whereas small businesses have gone down significantly, at least in the United States. And I think part of that is the fact that because there's so many varying opinions and there isn't one consistent rule, the people who suffer the most are the people who can't afford that sort of uncertainty.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the perspective from the American side. Does anyone want to share your opinion on the policy, especially people who haven't really talked? If not, I kind of want to use this remaining time to move on to the next question, if that's okay. Yeah, so I want you guys to put yourself into policymakers' shoes and think about you know, what you could do to kind of alleviate this anxiety around COVID, or if you guys could come up with some like improvement. Yeah, I think I would like to use this time to discuss that.
I think for like, just from my experience as for leaders, it's really important just for people to lead by example. And like, if you are a political leader and you're asking people to like wear masks and do all these things, then you should be the one also doing all of this in front of the public, and not making exceptions because you are like a political figure and you're in a closed off community and stuff like that. Because like people will look to you and they don't, when they look at like a social media poster, for example, they're not going to consider, oh, this person's like on their private, in their private, like wherever, like secluded, not wearing a mask. So that means that it's, so they're not gonna, like, they're gonna just see them outside not wearing a mask and think that, oh, it's okay to also be outside not wearing a mask, not considering the differences in the situations. And so like, I guess practice what you preach as a political leader, but also try to be more equal in considering what's fair for everybody and not try to make policies that would just help you, which I guess for a political leader, for someone like in a crisis, it's difficult because you're in a pandemic and you don't know what to do, but you also have to just be more aware of everybody and how you can best help the global community or even your national community.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially because I think I read an article yesterday that the Democratic Congress people were kind of under fire because they were going to have this dinner for the newly elected Congress people. And they actually changed it that it's not going to be a dinner where you sit down and eat, but the people can come in and take their food to go, which I thought at that point, like, why even do it? But yeah, and the people's who commented on it and were saying you can't do this, it was exactly that point, like you said, Maddie, that you as politicians should be setting example for the public, especially in a time where we're having, like yesterday, 184,000 new cases a day. This is literally the worst we've experienced so far, at least in terms of new cases. The death rate hasn't been quite as bad yet, although it is rising. Yeah, so I thought that was a really interesting point.
Any other like final comment?
I think like if I are the leaders who can actually make the policy on COVID-19 effect, I think I'm just gonna let everyone to do PCR test instead of just supplying go-to campaign, because go-to campaign is only available for rich people who have got a lot of time to do remote work, but then this cannot be done by like the I'm not like the people who need to work outside and to stay at the places where they work at. So yeah, I'm just gonna let everyone to do PCR test, and I think this is gonna lead to have less number of people who are gonna be infected by COVID-19.
I also think like we need to see more like equality, like we need to make policy like equality. I also think like in the go-to campaign we get to go to eat, like only like people has time, especially like elderly or like and university student, they can use, but most are like essential worker or like they are really hardworking, they because of their lack of like money, and then they definitely can't use those policies. So we need, I also think we need to make a policy more like equally to give it to everyone.
yeah, thank you guys for contributing to the discussion. I know we are running out of time almost. Can we have like a volunteer to like present? If not, I really like the point Maddie brought up. So if you could like volunteer and like share our like what we talked, that would be really great.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. And I think the room will close soon. So yeah, thank you again. And I will see you guys in the main room.
Okay. Thank you so much for all delegates and alumni. That was really enjoyable discussion. Okay, so I hope everyone is back and enjoy the discussion. So now is the time to share what you discuss in the group. So you have 2 minutes and Matsumoto-kun will be a timekeeper. So first we would like to ask group economics to share their. Yeah, thank you, Marina. And I'm gonna pass it to you, Yuta.
Okay, so in our groups, we had a lot of discussions like from various points concerning the economy. First, we talked about the relations between the environment and the economy, like in this COVID-19 situation, how we can constantly have an economic development concerning the environment as well. And also we had situations, the issues of the healthcare workers. In the COVID-19 situation, we see like medical interns working at an extremely low wage in the hospitals of Japan. And also we saw various industries. Oh, thank you. We saw various industries collapsing like COVID. For example, the airlines and also the tourism industry as well. Yeah, and also we had a point that I think there are some business ideas that are born in by chance, that like in this online era, like we have to go through a step as to like press the Zoom link and go into a virtual session. So there are no like business ideas that are born by chance. And also we talked about the division between the real economy and the stock market. So the system of the stock market isn't just working in this COVID-19 era. And last but not least, we also talked about like division between the people who work in the manufacturer industry, the blue colors and the white colors, and like how we need the white colors to kind of explain to the blue colors if they have enough security for their work. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. Sounds like you have a lot of discussions in different topics. So next, I would like to ask healthcare system group.
Yeah, for healthcare, we addressed mostly the healthcare system that's in the US and also in Japan. And we talk about how a lot of nurses and doctors were fired because of the lack of budget in hospitals and local healthcare systems. And we also talk about how like the government in the States, even though COVID cases are rising, and right now we're seeing a lot about like more than 100,000 cases every single day, but people are experiencing fatigue of coronavirus, and it seems that less people are paying attention to it. So a lot of the times the government should be responsible to collaborate with media and to spread the information of how important we're still we need to tackle COVID, and especially in a time when during the election, the media seem to prioritize Biden and Trump's different policies for the next 4 years, but seem to like forgot about addressing how severe the pandemic is. And we also talk about how we need to provide more budget for local communities to provide resources to support people get flu shots, get healthy. And then we also need more mental health workers to work with people who have experienced social phobia and other mental illnesses. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So next, I would like to ask my group education. Nana, can you go?
Of course. Yeah, so we talked about education and how COVID is affecting our education. We talked about both maybe the positive side of online education and negative side. So the positive side that I brought up was I particularly can spend more time with my family. The negative aspect is, I need to deal with time difference, maybe feeling of isolation. And then we also talked about what's the benefit of what we can gain from online education, and also if we were a political leader in Japan or the United States, what would we do? Yeah, and then we talked about how we would want to provide more choices for students, and I also think that there's just so many uncertainties, so just making them able to feel comfortable and in the situation. And I know a lot of students feeling anxiety, and a lot of students are feeling depression also. So just providing a lot of support systems, I think is really important.
Thank you so much. So next is the politics group.
I will pass on Risako.
So in our group, we talked about how this pandemic revealed about the health and society and how people react during these crises. And in America, people tended to connect their political beliefs and the healthcare system and wearing masks. And it also revealed how and surfaced how the country's weak points and resilience, such as in the American election systems. We also talked about the positive and negative results of the actions of both the governments. And for the American side, we talked about the negative side, such as the transparency of the policies and what the government was actually doing to resolve the issues regarding the pandemic. And there was also insufficient authority given to healthcare organizations and experts, and instead the administration was taking full control of the policies and to guide the people on what to do. And there was also lack of contact tracing apps and technical infrastructure to control the virus. And in Japan, there were also questions about the efficiency of distributing the masks. And we thought that Japan seems more organized, but that may not be due to the government's policies, but more of the culture of Japanese people to be used to wearing masks in a daily basis.
Thank you so much for sharing. Next is the culture group, please.
Yeah, so we will have Maddie as our presenter.
So our culture group talked about the difference in, or I guess once COVID, the virus came around, it revealed a lot more of people's true or more aggressive nature, especially towards other people when it comes to policing about mask wearing and just being regarding the whole situation and just how people are treating each other. So while people are often at home and in having to quarantine or self-isolate, they are left to their thoughts, which often will lead to more judgment if they're on SNS and having much less to do out socially, which can also lead to biases and judgments that may not be 100% accurate. We also then moved to talk about specific actions that have been taken since COVID, which we think may have been a positive or negative for as new ideas to be introduced, such as the Go To campaign in Japan, which encourages people to go to restaurants in order to maintain business and stimulate continue to stimulate the economy. But we addressed the concerns with this kind of program because it focuses more on the already defined the well-defined restaurants and those with the financial stability to continue, but not focusing on those who are smaller businesses or need more support, which separates the different, widens the gap between the restaurants and different businesses. So smaller businesses are more likely to shut down because they're not being supported in the ways that they need. And I guess that's time, but thank you.
Thank you so much. So lastly is the environment group.
So for the environment, first of all, we thought that in general, we realize how much contact we have daily, and the society is much more connected than we expected. But at the same time, it revealed the flaws and delicacy of systems. And specifically in the US, it split the country between people who believe there is no pandemic, vice versa. And for the mandatory mask wearers, people think that it's against the Constitution of human rights. And also for the Black Lives Matter, it might have not got attention if people were not blocked into their houses. And in Japan, most people are protecting the rules, and that was because Japan focuses on harmony. But also at the same time, people start to attack people who don't follow the rules. And also they start attacking specific groups, such as university students who had a drink meeting. But in common, policing happens commonly. And for environment-specific aspects, in California, it seemed like getting back to the old days, which was clear air and from no cars from the road. And most flights were canceled, and that contributed to fuel reduce, and people use washable masks. And also for the mask, the world learned how to use masks from Japan, and also Japan learned how to use fabric and washable design masks. And for we also answered question number 3, which was if you were the political leader, what would you do? And this was it was halved between choosing how to die, economic wise or health wise. And there are both types of opinions. And for example, in Hawaii, they shut down and got to 0 cases, but the government opened back up, and now they have lots of cases. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing and participating. So lastly, if we have time, we would like to ask alumni if they have some comments, thoughts, and feedbacks. So if anyone like to give us some feedbacks, that would be really great. If not, I would like to pass on to Akiko to do the closing.
Okay. I was impressed at everyone's perspectives, and I feel that the core issues of COVID-19 is definitely health or medical issues, but COVID-19 also have changed the social norms, such as remote work or online classes, and of course online tasks. And meanwhile, we tend to pay attention to only our surroundings changing along with COVID-19. And some Japanese media says new normal is coming or something or something. But COVID-19 and our discussion in Health RT taught me that health is not simple, and healthy condition is composed of many factors in the social construction. So yeah, the definition on priority of health is different, depends on people or backgrounds which people have. So to sum up, COVID-19 might be turning point in human history, but I think this pandemic does not create new normal, just reveal how normal people did not consider it about health, I think. So thank you very much for joining this activity. And if you are healthy now, let's have gratitude for not only healthcare workers, but also all people surrounding you. Thank you for listening. And I will pass on Hayato.
All right, thank you. With that, we will end the health RT session and go into a break. So
it looks like we'll end the break at 10:30 Japan, and that is 8:30 Eastern, so about 20 minutes from now. And then we'll be back for the final RT presentation from the Environment and Development Roundtable.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, it looks like I'm seeing most cameras back. So I will now pass it on to Yano Ryu, who will begin the presentation for the Environment and Development RT.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Plastic World. I think that in these days, almost no one can live without plastic. Although plastic has a huge advantages, it has also a disadvantages. So today we are going to talk about plastic. Next, please. Thank you. Here is the agenda. Delegates, Ishii alumni will discuss about in the breakout room. So please be looking forward to the discussion. The first part is the history of plastic. Would you start, Takuya?
Yes, okay. Okay, let me talk about the history of plastic. In 1870, an American named Hyatt invented celluloid, the first plastic in the world, as a raw material for making billiard balls. It was the beginning of plastic. Next, during the World War II, it was mass-produced and appeared in the lives of ordinary citizens because it outperformed metal in terms of cheapness and convenience. It was the beginning of plastic issues. Currently, many companies are developing easily recyclable and biodegradable plastics and alternatives to plastics. Moreover, plastics discarded in landfills cause pollution of the soil and oceans, and if burned, contributes to air pollution and global warming. In the future, will the Earth be turned into a plastic world? Okay, next is Hiroshi.
Thank you, Takuya. Then I'll talk about pros and cons of plastic. From an economical point of view, the advantage is that plastic production is a large industry and supports many people's life. But the downside is that fishing, tourism, and shipping industries are damaged because of the plastic pollution. From a social point of view, thanks to plastic, you can live a convenient and sanitary life. However, microplastics are suggested as a potential hazard to human health. And from an environmental point of view, you can say that plastics save many natural resources, including woods, animal fur, and metal. If people stop using plastics completely, these resources will be depleted. On the other hand, plastics cause plastic pollution in the ocean and contribute to climate change when plastic wastes are burned. Therefore, it's hard to tell if plastic is good or bad.
So for my part, I'm going to talk about the policy regarding the ban on plastic bags from an international perspective by focusing on the United States, the European Union, Japan. In addition, I would talk about the implication that those policies have. Next slide, please. So the United States is one of the nations that are implementing the ban on plastic bags. However, that policy remains as a state level policy rather than nationally implemented one. And the main reason is due to the political system of the United States, which grants high degree of autonomy to local governments. Therefore, while 8 states have banned single-use plastic bags, the vast majority of states has some or doesn't have any regulations. Moreover, considering the current political climate of the United States, it is hard to consider or imagine that a ban on plastic bags on a national level will ever be implemented in the near future. In the case of the European Union, they have reached a consensus and decided to implement a ban on single-use plastic items from 2019. However, the EU member states have failed to create a domestic law that will affirm the European Parliament's decision, mainly because of COVID-19. As a result of COVID, the usage of plastic bags has rapidly increased in Europe due to hygiene reasons. Moreover, due to the EU's mishandling of the pandemic, it has amplified distrust of quite a few member states towards the European Union. And the frustration that is created from that may turn into EU skepticism. And if that happens, there will be an obstacle for implementing a policy like banning plastic bags that cannot be implemented without cooperation among EU member states. In sum, COVID-19 has or may well stagnate the effort to dramatically reduce the single-use plastic in Europe. Finally, I will talk about the situation in Japan. On July 2020, the Japanese government has officially banned business from freely providing plastic bags. In comparison with the US, environmental policies in general are not a partisan issue in Japan. When Japan ratified the Paris Agreement, the diet approved it by an anonymous consent. And Prime Minister Suga, who is also the leader of one of the most conservative parties in Japan, the Liberal Democratic Party, officially declared that Japan will pursue zero emission by 2050, which would be considered as a progressive policy in the US context. So in sum, in the case of the United States and Europe, due to the political divide accelerated by COVID-19, may stagnate the reduction of plastic bags. Moreover, in the case of Japan, Japan will be likely to reduce the usage of plastic bags on a national scale and has the potential of taking leadership of it on a global scale.
Okay, so next, we'll try to introduce 4 different perspectives toward plastics and its issue. And I'd like to thank you all for your cooperation with our survey. So before I talk about what we've learned from the interview with Mr. Takahashi from the Earth Company, please let me explain what Earth Company is. So Earth Company is an incorporated associate organization that mainly works in Japan and Indonesia. So since they cherish the saying of Native Americans, that is, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. They have motivated and trained people who create the future for our next generation through 4 businesses, including consultation with company and an educational institution within Japan called Operation Green. So with the Operation Green project and through the consultation, they try to achieve authentic change by reforming the offices of company, schools, and the governments into eco-friendly ones. Therefore, in order to expand their project, they find implementation partners who are also their clients and ambassadors who could help them propagate their action by holding seminars for companies mainly in Japan and asking the company to implement the eco policy that our company has made. So although their projects are not focusing on the issue of plastic waste directly, we were able to hear their views on the existing plastic waste issue in Japan as an example. So as for the opinions about plastic waste that Mr. Takahashi has, he seems to be a little pessimistic because no matter how hard our company tries, the current situation will not change unless the corporations that are relevant to the production and use of plastics change. Also, all consumers can do is to be conscious of the issue and ethical consumption. Mr. Takahashi also pointed out that we need to visualize the process of garbage disposal and explain why we need to reduce the amount of plastic waste in the first place. So lastly, concerning the struggle they have, they are mainly two. Firstly, they haven't established a business model that they can benefit from making companies and the school operate more eco-friendly systems, since the advantage that company could have by investing to the advisory service of its Earth company can be invisible. Secondly, opportunities for Earth company to inspire the management of companies and change their mindset are limited. Having a seminar held by the Earth company's president, Mr. Hamakawa, is one such opportunity. Next, I'd like to pass it on to Hiroshi.
Okay, so I would like to introduce a scientific perspective. I had an interview with researchers at Hokkaido University who study the impact of plastic on the marine ecosystem. As for plastic pollution, researchers are studying two factors. One is the impact of large plastic litter like plastic bags. These are known to be ingested by marine mammals and seabirds. And in recent years, microplastics have also come into the spotlight. Microplastics are plastic particles that have been broken up into small pieces. These particles are known to have the ability to absorb toxic substances. There is a concern that fish and shellfish may swallow them, which could harm their growth. There is also the possibility of toxicity buildup in humans from eating such fish. However, as for microplastics, its real impact has not been cleared yet. It is currently in the risk assessment phase and no obvious dangers have been reported yet. And I also asked them what they would like the public to keep in mind from a researcher's perspective. They said three things. The first one is to not litter your garbage, because if no one litters, plastic pollution doesn't happen. The second is to rethink the use of plastic. The use of plastic is increasing every year because plastic doesn't break down. If current consumption patterns and waste management practices do not improve, there may be more plastic than fish in the ocean by weight by 2050, according to the research. And the third is to confirm the source of information. Since the media has an aspect of sensationalism, you need to be objective about the information.
Okay, next I will introduce the perspectives of the Ministry of Environment of Japan based on the interview we had with Mr. Abe, who promotes recycling, and Mr. Iseki, who investigates plastic waste in the ocean. So we were able to ask them what the government officials of Japan expect from the citizen and how they tackle to reduce the amount of plastic waste as well. So firstly, as an example of their initiatives, the Ministry of Environment of Japan has launched a campaign to address the issue of marine waste, calling for regulation from various industries. This campaign encourages consumers to deter excessive use of plastic products such as plastic bags for shopping. Although they promote people to avoid using plastic products, they think it is unrealistic to stop the use of plastic at all. So through this interview, we've also found that many states depend on other states to deal with the issue of plastic waste. They mentioned Japan has lost an important channel to throw the garbage away since neighboring countries, including China and other Southeast Asian countries, stopped importing the garbage a couple years ago, and they used to buy around 10 million tons of garbage each year on average. And also countries in Europe, such as Norway, have taken initiative to become more eco-friendly by creating new rules for international society that combine economic policy and sustainability. Next, I'll pass on to Victoria.
All right, so next we would like to look at the terms of plastic usage with the views of the consumer. And to do that, we sent out a survey for mostly JASC delegates and asked about their thoughts on plastic. And as an example, their willingness to use reusable bags over plastic bags. Next, please. Okay, so first I would like to thank everyone for filling out the survey again. Your thoughts and responses are very useful to us, and thank you. From the survey, we found out that currently 83% of people have somewhat negative feelings about the usage of plastic. Next page, please. And 78.7% of people use reusable bags when shopping instead of plastic bags. And next page, please. So looking at the results of the survey, we asked why people sometimes don't use reusable bags versus plastic bags, even though most people have negative thoughts about plastic bags. And here's what they say. On the red, we see that these are people who use plastic bags over reusable bags. And they said that they use plastic bags because they often forget to bring reusable bags. And people who use reusable bags says that they're better for the environment and better quality, so they won't break as easily as plastic bags and can carry more items, and they're more comfortable to hold. And on the other side, they said plastic bags could later be used as garbage bags. So that's very useful, and reuse is one of the environmental terms that we see nowadays. Another one for reusable bags is the reusable bags reduces the amount of plastic waste contributed to garbage piles. And if this person can reduce their individual consumptions and use of plastics, they hope that others will do the same. Now, the person who uses plastic bags says, I have not taken the time to get one, and they usually shop in bulk, so they would often forget it. And this has to do with the bans and policies of different areas, but the person who uses reusable bag might say that it costs money to get plastic bags from stores, and therefore they use reusable bags. And so I will continue on. There's two more, but I will continue on to the next slide. Fortunately, in the future, we find that most people are able to reduce their usage of plastic bags, and they could in everyday life, and implies that most people have a willingness to reduce plastic use in some ways if needed. Next slide. So within people who do not use reusable bags, most of them are aware of the issue but have different perspectives on it. We found that people who use plastic bags not because they forget to bring it, but also because they think plastic bags could be better for an environment depending on the use after, which is suggested from the difference in percentage between the impressions of plastic usage and usage of plastic bags, which were presented in the earlier slides. Lastly, we would like to quickly mention that since the survey was done mostly within the JASC community, the sample sizes was very small. We are aware and expect the numbers to be different for the population from our results, and the sample does not represent the whole population. Next slide, please. So given the information from our interviews, the research we did, and the data from our surveys, we organized some main points and our thoughts on how to combat the plastic waste problem through different methods. And below are some bullet points of our thoughts. We think that we could educate the general population with data on plastic usage and therefore promoting choices regarding alternative use to single plastics. In terms of education, we can also educate the general public on disposing plastic waste properly and therefore reducing less plastic waste that ends up in the oceans. And we can also fund recycle programs to reuse this plastic as a recycling program. In terms of companies and corporations, we could encourage companies to decrease single-use plastics and lessen packaging, and also make plastic alternative products more affordable to the consumers. In situations where single-use items are necessary, for example, the medical field, researching plastic alternatives, biodegradable products might be a good way to go. And some of the more controversial solutions might be with each individual countries or different countries, they can create policies or bans on single-use plastics. And another solution we could work on is supporting programs working on eliminating and combating plastic waste. All right, next slide.
Thank you, Victoria. Then let's go to the discussion part. Next, please. Then we are going to talk about two topics. One topic is, what are the causes of plastic issues? Why do you think the plastic issue is difficult to solve? And the other is, in your opinion and experiences, is there an extent where limiting, regulating plastic could be determined? We will have two groups that will present, as group 4 and group 10. So please be ready to summarize the what you discussed. And let's go to the breakout rooms.
Hey there.
Hi everyone. How's it going?
Good.
Are you trying to say?
What was the question?
Oh, sorry. The question.
No, what was the question again?
I will paste it on the chat. So the first one is, what are the causes of plastic issues? And why do you think the plastic issue is difficult to solve? I mean, obviously, what I can think of is that they mentioned in the slides as well, but it's cheap and, you know, it comes in handy. Yeah, like, and then.
Well, one thing.
True.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I know, and then I just wanted to say that not flexibility, but like you can just form it in any shape or form, right? That's also convenient. Yeah, but what were you going to say, Keisuke?
One thing that I can say is, like, you know, just from my knowledge, like, you know, the deregulation of oil and the, you know, the formation of OPEC is one of the, you know, clear, you know, contribution of the, you know, plastic usage, because, you know, those are plastic or plastic bags are, you know, mainly produced from, like, you know, the oils. And then before, like, you know, in the early 20th century, or yeah, in the early, I would say early 20th century, like, you know, the oil was not like that much open resources to the world compared to the right now, because, you know, there is no clear, I mean, yeah, organization who's gonna, you know, responsible for all the production of oil in the as a whole world. So, like, you know, of course there were, you know, plastic were used commonly, but, you know, in some certain extent, or in some countries, you know. But, you know, as the OPEC or the deregulation of oil industry has been achieved in the late 20th century, now the, you know, the production of plastics or usage of oil for plastic bags were, you know, increased significantly. So I would say that kind of thing, that kind of political stuff is the huge contribution to the, you know, the increase in plastic bags, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, now, I mean, you mentioned it started from like deregulation and politics behind the oil usage. So, and then I was thinking, if we were to, reduce the amount of plastic that we use, I think the only way forward is, a stricter regulations. I mean, grassroots movement and like all those, daily things that you can do definitely counts, but to tackle this problem as a whole, there's no way other than how do you say, government intervention. And then one I can think of is that we're in a capitalism world, so like just incentivize corporations with money, like tax reductions for alternative solutions, and then also like we did in Japan, or like every other countries are doing it, like put some extra costs on using plastic, like single-use plastics, and then from that on, I think we can, we can start from that, I guess. Can you think of other solutions or like regulations that government can put on corporations or individuals?
One thing that I think makes this problem difficult to solve, even in the States, no matter what kind of grassroots movements you have, is, in my state at least, there's only about 15 to 20% of any recyclable materials, including plastic or plastic bottles, are actually, like, even if you separate your trash from recyclables, only 15 to 20% of it is actually recycled. So I'm not sure why they do that or why that is, but it definitely doesn't help the issue. And I think finding some way to get more attention about that or change that policy would be a really great start, because no matter what we as individuals could do, if the government or if like recyclable or recycle centers are only handling 15 to 20% of what's actually being recycled, then it's like running on a treadmill. You're not going to get anywhere no matter how hard you try.
That's a very interesting point. So do you think it would not make much difference even if we act locally?
I think it's a really great start, but I feel like not a lot of people know about it, and people will just continue to think that they're doing like really good for their community, and they are, to their credit, they are, but it's like communication. Communication is a two-way street, and if one side isn't upholding what the other side is expecting of them, then that can only hinder it can hinder any fruitful results that we could expect.
I would say, like, one fundamental cause of that kind of issue, or like, why acting locally for this issue, it's not that much sufficient strategy. It's like, maybe there's not so just a few interest group can actually benefit from the recycling actually, or earn the direct benefit from recycling, because they know like recycling is maybe good for the environment, but if you do that, then you cannot directly earn something from the recycling, right? Immediately. So that's why there's few groups that I can earn the actual benefit from the recycling. And then I would say this is the why, acting that kind of way is not that much that have influence upon a society. And then I add on that, because of that, always there's a close strategy called the carrot and stick in order to mobilize people into one certain action. But as we have discussed, it's kind of hard to define benefit to all of them. For all. Maybe I would say that one alternative solution for this problem is just putting the sanction sticks in compared to the carrots. Yeah, so maybe economic sanction, whatever, but that kind of punitive actions can be the one solution.
If we're thinking about individual solutions, I suppose, for the point that I just brought up about even though you could be recycling stuff, only 15 to 20% of it actually gets recycled. An individual way that you can fix that is just use reusable plastics instead of single-use plastics. So having a plastic water bottle that you reuse and you can wash and stuff like that, that helps for sure. As well as reusable bags, like we were saying in the main room. There's other ways, certainly. And it comes down to also, the individual level at least, just limiting your consumption of plastics in the first place, because you can make a conscious decision to limit your plastic use in some ways. But I will concede that a lot of plastic use comes from larger corporations and factories and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done there to really make a larger effect.
I can do on that, in order to produce such kind of individual effort, maybe the first thing we can start off is maybe we can tell people we need to sacrifice in order to spread that kind of the sense of recycling at the first stage, because as Scooter says, still use of plastic is the most beneficial or efficient in terms of cost, right? So if we still say people to ask to recycle or things like that, maybe they will not do that. So we need to pay some cost, as Kristen said, we have that kind of reusable bottles. So what we need to do is making it cheaper than plastics at the first. Of course, it will not be beneficial, or some companies will be struggling for making it cheap. But making cheap the reusable bottles or that kind of stuff is the cost to produce or to to make it the sense prevail, So I would say that kind of notion of paying the cost at the first stage is kind of necessary, I guess. Yeah.
Do you all mind if I speak a little bit? I've really enjoyed your conversation. So, I mean, I know I'm an alumni. I went through 20 years ago and spent time living in Japan and Singapore, and I guess my cat's here too. But I'm really impressed by the kinds of things that you're saying and the way that you're saying them. I feel like the topics that you're discussing are very, very balanced, and I feel like nobody's trying to be radical or trying to be unrealistic and those sorts of things. So I just want to thank you for that dialogue, and I'm sure you do have those feelings and wish some things were totally different, but I think it's I've been to between visiting some in Japan and the one I went to in America, I've probably been to maybe 4 or 5 of these, and even though you have really hard situation over Zoom, you're doing a great job, and probably the dialogue is really good. As far as the environment and the discussion of the things that you're talking about, I mean, I think you're saying all the right things about corporate versus individual responsibility, because I think that anybody could, I mean, one person doesn't actually make that much difference. I mean, if you died, the environment wouldn't actually be any better than it was without you here or whatever. But big company, I live in a factory town, and a big company could accidentally dump hundreds of gallons of corn syrup into the Mississippi River, and it would make a giant difference. I mean, that's actually happened. So it really, I do think corporations need to take responsibility for this, and I think they used to take more responsibility in the old days, like until the 80s even. Pop bottles were glass, and until the 50s milk bottles were glass, and they just turned them back into the company and they filled them back up and reused them, and that's the best form of recycling. So and as far as if I were wanting to be an activist, I think the most traction could be, finding individual solvable issues and then like working on them. I mean, and some, I'm sure of some successes, but like, why are we talking about plastic ban to begin with? It's because there's an island of trash in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and every time there's a tsunami, there's more trash than animals. So the more you can bring attention to specific solvable issues, I think people are on board, and I'm sure there's issues that we haven't even thought of that could be solved. So I talked a whole lot. Thank you so much for that. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much for speaking up. Sorry, go ahead, Scooter.
Oh no, I was just, you mentioned about the corporate responsibility, and then I was thinking that back in like 70s and 80s, like Japan had like this 4 big court cases where people who suffered from the factory waste sued those companies, and then that evolved into establishing the environment, like Ministry of Environment in Japan. But it made me think that, like, perhaps the harm all those companies are causing to the society might be, I mean, it can be deadly sometimes, and then it's transforming an environment. And then, I mean, of course there's no like measure of how big the damage is compared to like that 60s 70s cases. I mean, we have no ways to compare those two, but I was just wondering, does any of you know any cases where individuals or a group of individuals sued a certain company for this kind of, you know, plastic waste, and then because they were affected by it, perhaps indirectly, but maybe not, or maybe it might going to be a thing in the next 10 years, I don't know.
I've never heard of a court case about like corporations and their use of like plastic and dumping and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure in the States they're out there. It's just, it's not something that I've personally looked into. I believe I took an economics class in like my freshman year of college. And if I remember right, there was, this is rather recent, I believe, but there is, I want to say it's a government implemented, it's either funding or like they cut off the company completely, but there's like a cap on how much waste they can produce to just to kind of like limit the what is it, like the waste that a company or that a corporation can put out. However, I believe in the States they're pretty generous with how much that actually is. So it's really hard to say, and I think that we do need to be, well, I mean, it's not something I can implement myself. I'm only a college student, but just kind of, if there's a way that we can be more strict about how much a corporation can use, or if like Keisuke was saying earlier, if implementing sanctions was something that was met with a lot of backlash, then possibly having a government stipend for being under, like really far under the amount of waste that they're allowed to have, like some sort of incentive for corporations to actually switch to less wasteful means of making products.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that would be like, you know, tax cuts in, I mean, of course, not just, you know, simply tax cuts, but, you know, giving some tax incentives might be the option. Like, oh, I just Googled like, you know, any court cases, and it's actually been not that much of a thing, but I found like 2 court cases where it's an environmental organization suing like P&G and like Pepsi, those big companies, for polluting, you know, local rivers and, yeah, water. But because it was back in February this year, or around March, I think it's not been settled yet. I really have to dig down on that. But I think that kind of, you know, significant court rulings would also affect greatly too. I mean, obviously it did for Japan once. So I hope, you know, if we can establish this precedent that corporations has to take responsible, I think that would be a step forward. I mean, of course, you know, I hope the judges aren't biased, or like, I hope that ruling is something based on justification and like a good evidence. But still, I think if it were to be ruled that corporations are responsible, I think it will be a big effect to the industry and into the society.
This might be getting into a completely different issue, but I do remember there was I mean, it's not plastic, but there was the big, it was the oil spill in the Gulf. I remember that. And I remember this was pretty recent. It was like a few years ago or maybe not even a few years ago, but there was the pipeline controversy in North Dakota, I want to say. But I mean, that was controversial, or well, that's controversial for more reasons than just the environment itself.
I mean, environmental pipeline issue is in Canada, if you know. Yeah, I mean, it's more controversial about like Trudeau's policy itself. Like he's pro, like, you know, sustainable, eco-friendly person, but at the same time, he's proposing this pipeline to be built. So, I mean, yeah, please, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, Christine, please.
No, you're good. I think you probably would know more about it than I would. I've only heard about them in passing, so if anyone could elaborate on either of those.
なんだろうね。
Can I don't know, I mean, asking just random question, I mean, regarding the pipeline and Trudeau. I mean, so the justification for Trudeau to supporting that pipeline is that because so there's like a chunk of oil reserve that's not like refined, of course, in like, where was it? I think it was like westward of Canada. And then to bring that to like city center and then like, you know, to the port to transfer it and then sell it. You know, the current pipeline and the transportation system, which like using trucks and stuff is, you know, very inefficient. So what Trudeau is proposing for is that because, I mean, by building that pipeline and then, you know, streamlining the oil, you know, transportation, like, and then, you know, selling those to other countries and then earning money, we can use that to, you know, transform our, like, you know, source of power to more sustainable ones. So he's saying that, you know, we are using that, you know, I mean, one, we can reduce carbon emission by reducing the carbon emission that, how do you say, during the production of that oil per se. And then two, by using those profits from the oil reserve, Canada can go more, how do you say, eco-friendly. But do you think that stands? I mean, I know the world isn't like, you know, beautiful. I don't know. It's not like ideal. Of course, like we have to take some, how do you say, we have to compensate some stuff, but do you think that's justifiable move, or like, do you think, I mean, I just wanted to ask, what do you make of it? Producing more oil to become more eco-friendly, I think.
Okay. Actually, Keisuke, go ahead. You had something to say.
Like, I don't know, but you know, why Trudeau, I'm Prime Minister, was that the Prime Minister, right? Prime Minister Trudeau is saying, I mean, the behind reason is, I would say that the main industry within Canada is forestry, and then they needed to, like, you know, export the, you know, tons of, you know, goods to the outer world, right? So like, you know, then they, in the past, like, you know, they, in order to, you know, ship those kind of stuff, like, you know, they needed to, you know, import the oils again, like, from the, you know, via OPEC, that kind of stuff. So like, you know, then it, of course, it is a third organization, so they will take money from, importing, the oil, right? So the behind reason should be like, Trudeau wanted to make it cheaper. I mean, if they can take oil by themselves, you don't have to pay. So then that kind of justification goes to that kind of stuff, as I guess, because they wanted to, promote more forestry industry, like, so then he used, that kind of stuff as an excuse for building the pipeline of the gas or oil. And then, so I would say it can be like, kind of opposite way, like he said creating, pipeline could be eco-friendly, but it actually promotes more forestry industry to cut the trees down within the Canada. So that would be opposite way, maybe, I don't know, but yeah.
So if I may, I think that I was thinking of a different issue with a different pipeline. So I was thinking of the Dakota Access Pipeline from a few years ago. So the issue with that was they were building or constructing a pipeline on a bunch of Native American reservation lands, and it was like directly interfering with the water source on those reservations. So I guess, and this might be, actually we only have 10 seconds, but never mind. I was gonna say maybe this is not just an overall issue that every community faces. I mean, it certainly is, but I think that it unfairly affects communities that are less privileged in general, is what I am thinking right now.
Go on. Nice job, guys.
Thanks. Yeah, but definitely, I think, yeah, Christine, you're right. And then I sure.
I think that all members are back. So number group 4, would you summarize what you discuss?
What we group 4?
Carly's group is group 4.
Okay, thanks.
Hello?
Yes. Hi, Carly.
Hi, sorry, my connection is cutting out. But we had a very interesting conversation. We had 2 alumni and 3 delegate participants. So maybe perhaps Audrey could speak on what we talked about.
Oh boy. So we sort of just talked historically and modernly about our experiences kind of with trash and trash sorting and the ways that they worked in different areas. We talked about urban versus rural and Japan versus the United States. We also talked a little bit about the history of the use of plastic as a technology and moved from there to think about kind of the ways that we implement it and the ways that it could be implemented better. Yes, that's mostly what we talked about. It was a lot of different sort of threads running through our discussion.
Thank you. Then next group 10, would you summarize what you discussed?
Oh, okay. First, we talk about lots of things. For example, I think Celinda's idea is very interesting. When you talk about plastic, we first come up with plastic bags, but around our lives, many products are made by plastic, so we have to notice the things. And
And we also talk about culture, like mass product and mass consume culture. So we buy lots of things, including which we don't need, and still or to avoid immediately. So we have to think a lot before we buy something, and we use the thing as long as possible. And we also talk about how COVID-19 affect environmental problems. For example, in this situation, reusable things have like a danger of infected by COVID-19. So using plastic bags or plastic plates are recommended. But in the other hand, like people don't use a car or train. People are always at home, so that have a good effect on environmental problems. So we don't know whether like COVID-19 affect like positively or negatively. And Fabi, do you want to say any more?
Yeah, I think you hit on everything really nicely. We also talked about microplastics in fish and how the fishing industry, when, because there's such a high demand for fish, both in the US and Japan, remnants of like fishing nets and stuff end up in the ocean, which are then consumed by wildlife. And then we eat the fish that have consumed these plastic products. So we also talked about how plastic can be detrimental to human health through our own food chain as a result of our plastic consumption. Yeah, and as well as minimalist culture, mass consumption, all of that. Thank you, Ayak.
Thank you. I wish all the groups has a great time to have a great time, discussion time. And next, Victoria, conclusion, please.
All right, I can wrap up the presentation. Can someone share screen? Thank you. Okay. So in conclusion, what the main points that we found in our research and our wonderful interviewers, we noticed that there are both pros and cons to using plastic, but there is also an extent where too much plastic usage is a problem. Currently, most countries recognize the effects of excess plastic waste and are currently finding a solution to solving the issue. Different areas in the world have different ways of tackling the problem, but one of the biggest issues is unifying everyone for the cause. Dealing with plastic waste requires everyone's help. This includes consumers, corporations, NPOs, and governments. Plastic waste is only one of the many environmental problems we face in our life today. So I hope that our presentation today will allow you to reflect on other environmental problems in the future. Thank you, everybody. And since our presentation is over, I would like to pass this back to Chris.
Thank you, Victoria. All right. Environment RT, excellent job. Now we will be going into our final break of the evening. The break will be ending at 9:40 US. I guess that is 11:40 Japan. So everyone, please go stretch your legs, grab a drink, and we'll meet back here in about 12 minutes. For those wise words. I think it's very true that the JAS does bring a very special set of people together, and there's so much that we can learn from each other and do to carry on the legacy that this conference has had for so long. And speaking of carrying on the legacy of JASC, I think we're actually going to change our schedule just slightly, and we're going to hear a short presentation from the chairs of JASC 73, Nana Hayami and Yuta Suzuki. So please, Nana and Yuta, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Nana Hayami, and I'm a junior at Bowdoin College. I was part of the cyberspace and threat RT and for JAS 72, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the American Executive Committee for JAS 73. So I would like to start off by addressing my reflections for 72 and then pass it on to Yuta. So, okay. Though I was a little bit nervous and hesitant at first about participating in an online conference, my JAS 72 experience blew me away. I still remember the first RT meeting that I had with Maddie and Celinda and how nervous yet excited I was. And then I met my other RT members, Yuna, Lisa, Yusuke, Nao, Shunsuke, and we just got along so well. And even online, I was able to create wonderful friendships and connections, and it taught me how special the JAS community is and how strong the bond is among JASKers. JAS 72 provided me the opportunity to reflect on myself and to believe in myself. And from participating on a panel discussion about social justice to having one-on-one Zoom calls with my fellow delegates from around Japan, the US, I was able to gain a broader global awareness and grow both academically and personally. And yes, we all wished for an in-person conference, but I think 72 delegates were able to experience something so unique and so memorable that we do not regret at all by participating in this online conference. And I think we were able to show to the outside, the greater world that what students are capable of doing, even in a global pandemic. And no matter how different our background or culture or identity is, we were able to come together and complete our journey as delegates or as ECs. And I think we are ready to take from the past and give it to the future. And I feel so grateful that I get to be part of JAS 72. So, and now Yuta, my fellow chair of JAS 73, will give his introduction and his reflections on JAS 72.
Okay, everyone. Hello. My name is Yuta Suzuki, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Tokyo. I participated in the 72nd JASC as a delegate of the Labor and Work Culture RT, and I'm honored to serve as the chair for the Japanese Executive Committee for the 73rd JASC. Looking back at the 72nd JASC, to be honest, at first I was rather concerned than excited to join an online conference lasting for 10 days straight, which I'm pretty sure that no one had ever experienced back in April. Many friends around me, and so did I, had a prejudice that true international exchange brought by face-to-face communication cannot be supplemented by online meetings. So having finished the online final forum today, I have to say that my thoughts, which I had beforehand, were wrong. The 72nd JASC was possibly the first platform for undergraduates and graduates to consider and discuss how the world would look like in the post-COVID era. Zoom meetings, essential workers, workation. These are just some of the words which came up as a topic in the Labor and Work Culture RT. The excitement to think about new concepts that no one else had ever thought about in the past was a privilege that the 72nd delegates shared. Every opinion made on those new topics were new and valuable for both Japan and the US as well. And this was an irreplaceable experience for the 72nd delegates. Not only was the 72nd JASC valuable from an academic point of view, but it was a unique experience for establishing friendship. I had opportunities to join other communities via Zoom in my university during this global pandemic. But JASC was the only group which made me feel comfortable when I actually had the chance to meet up with one of the members in person. I cannot explain fully as to why I felt this way, but I am sure that this is what makes the JASC experience special. So moving on and ending my thoughts on the 72nd JASC, me and Nana would like to talk briefly about the 73rd JASC, which is being planned by the 73 ECs right now. The summer conference of the 73rd JASC will be held from August 2nd to August 20th next year in Japan. The 4 sites JASC 73 will visit are Kyoto, Aomori, Fukushima, and Tokyo. Kyoto will be the first site where delegates from both countries will be going to meet up. We'll have no experiences and tea ceremony experiences. And it will be a site where delegates can interact with each other to make a foundation for a valuable discussion we're going to have ahead. The next site, Aomori, will be a site where delegates will experience a part of Japan, which is quite unfamiliar not only for the Amidalis, but for the Japanese as well, making it an opportunity for the whole delegation to see and experience the full vision of the Japanese society. The site will be including opportunities to visit and experience the Nebuta Festival, Misao Base, and a nuclear fuel reprocessing plant. The third site will be Fukushima. It'll be 10 years from the earthquake and tsunami in Japan next year. The idea to go to Fukushima actually originated from the Fukushima session we had in the online conference of the 72nd JASC. It'll be an opportunity to reconsider the damage caused by the nuclear power plants and the ideal crisis management for natural disasters. It'll be also an opportunity to think about the common points for discrimination against the workers in the nuclear power plants and the health workers currently curing patients who are tested positive for COVID-19. And last but not least, we will have Tokyo as our final site for delegates to conclude their thoughts and discussions we've had so far for JASC 73. We're planning LGBTQ panel sessions, receptions at the US Embassy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and discussions on education, etc. And passing on to Nana, I think she'll be explaining the RTs we're going to have for next year.
Yeah, so this year we have 7 RTs from various academic fields, and these include digitalization, human security, education and identity, natural disasters and crisis management, social philosophy and individual decision-making, science and ethics, social justice and media, and US-Japan presence in global politics. 73 ECs have put a lot of thought and energy in deciding these 7 RT topics, and it is our resolve that facilitating conversations about these topics is important to move forward together as young global leaders. And we hope these are 7 RT topics will encourage the 73 delegates from diverse academic and cultural backgrounds to come together and share their interests and passions. Chris, do I still have time?
Sure thing.
Okay, well, okay, great. So moving forward, talking about 73 JASC. So we may all agree that 2020 has been a year of unprecedented challenges for both the US and Japan, as well as the entire international community. The coronavirus has exposed the vulnerabilities of the political and economic systems in both nations. Tensions between the US and China also pose challenges to the US-Japan alliance. Race and identity and the injustices that stem from it became a global conversation, and it is our responsibility to continue this conversation until justice is served. Though technology has been developing at an exponential rate, and we've grown more dependent on its benefits recently, we also saw an increase in digital divide between classes and communities. On top of all the unknowns we've experienced so far, whether for better or worse, there was also a transition of leadership in both Japan and the United States. I hope that though we've experienced many hardships in the last year, these 2 countries will remain forever resilient in its unique bilateral relationship. Our theme for the JASC 73, Reflect, Reconnect, Rebuild, Standing Resilient, and Rising Towards Bilateral Harmony, encompasses the role and the hope for the future leaders of the US and Japan in a post-COVID world. Rather than seeing the challenges as a burden, JASC 73 hopes to see them as the opportunity to grow and change for greater good. And for the sake of achieving stability, prosperity, and peace in Asia and across the globe, it is crucial for the US and Japan to further develop and cooperate on sciences and technologies, also as to resolve diplomatic and economic issues and protect national security.
JASC 73 is an opportunity for students to reflect on the past as well as the present, reconnect with a greater world, and rebuild a stronger friendship between the US and Japan that will lead to an alliance with constant cooperation and collaboration in a global context. So I think I'll pass it on to Chris.
Thank you, Nana and Yuta, for your wonderful remarks. I think it's clear that JASC 73 is in great hands, and I look forward to seeing what you guys can accomplish in the future. Now we will transition into our keynote speech for the night. I do want to remind everyone that there will be a brief Q&A session after the remarks. If you wish to ask a question to our speaker, please do send a private message to me through the Zoom chat, and I will then call on people in the order that they messaged me once we reach the Q&A session. So now, without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Secretary Norman Mineta.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And as we get close to the finish of our final forum, I would like to ask everyone one question. So what is the purpose of JASC? It's such a simple but a crucial question for JASCers. Through the summer conference, I remember some of the delegates having this as a topic for their discussion. And after becoming an EC, I do not know how many times I've repeated this question to myself as well. Going back to 1934, JASC had a clear vision. JASC was established by 4 university students from Japan who had a sense of awareness for US-Japan relations back then and felt the need for students to have a role in improving that situation. From the situation back then, it can be said that the relationship between the US and Japan has improved as the founders of JASC looked for. Ever since, hearing from the alumnus as well, I find JASCers struggling to find the purpose of this conference and its true meaning. So, what will the purpose of the 73rd JASC be? I remember the first few days as an EC of the 73rd JASC back in August, where we had the discussion to decide which area of Japan we should go to as a site. The discussion ended tangled up, though eventually we came to the conclusion, which I introduced. The 73 ECs shared a belief that this essence of JASC is the dialogue within the delegates, regardless of whether or not it is offline. Now we face an era where not only Japan and the US, but the entire world is in a global crisis due to the pandemic. The theme for the 73rd JASC in Japanese will be 新時代の態度、絆と調和で築く未来. For each delegate lies each purpose for their JASC experience. But as a whole, the 73rd JASC will share a belief for each delegate who will be future leaders to establish the post-COVID era, to interact and build a bond with each other, which will last after JASC 73 ends as well. So having that, can I have Nana passing on?
Sorry. And then 73 ECs have been working so hard for the past almost 3 months. And from the day we became ECs in August, we have been working nonstop. We have an amazing group of people with different backgrounds, personalities, and interests. And I'll be honest, we've already faced many challenges and sometimes disagreements, and especially for AECs, the majority of us have never met each other in person, and we need to navigate through 4 different time zones. And even though there is so much uncertainty in this world we currently live in, there's one thing that I'm sure about, and that is how dedicated, supportive, and hardworking my fellow ECs are. And I feel so grateful that I get to work with an amazing group of people for the next 8 to 9 months, and I'm looking forward to seeing what will be the 73rd Japan American Student Conference.
Yes, and from me as well. I cannot thank enough for the spectacular ECs I've been working so far for the past 3 months. Having the Olympics and the COVID-19 situation ahead of us, I think the ECs of the 73rd JASC might be the best ECs JASC has ever had. As Nana mentioned, yes, we have had disagreements, and yes, we had miscommunication between ourselves. I expect we will have more issues ahead of us as well. But through this life-changing experience, I have confidence of making the 73rd JASC the best conference JASCers have ever seen. Thank you.
And finally, Yuta and I would like to express our gratitude to everyone here today, guests and alums. Thank you so much for being here today and for your continued support for JASC. Thank you, Linda and Nathaniel from ISC, and Kono-san, Ibe-san, and Goto-san from IEC for your advice and guidance. JASC would not be possible without your support and all that you do. And thank you to all the 72 delegates. We have completed one of the most unique conferences in the history of JASC, and we should be proud of ourselves. I hope our paths cross again in the future, and let's keep in touch. And last but not least, thank you to all of the 72 ECs who worked so hard to make this conference happen. As a chair for next year's conference, I now understand how much work, time, and energy you all put into planning this really special conference for the past 15 months. You probably had many miscommunication, arguments, disagreements, and numerous challenges. However, you should be all so proud of yourselves because you overcame those hardships, and here you are at the very last day of 72nd JASC. And now, I am confident to say that every single one of the 72 delegates appreciate all of you, and we're so thankful and proud to have all 16 of you as our ECs. You all set a really high bar for the 73 ECs, and it'll be really hard for us to fill your shoes, but we promise that we will pass the JASC spirit to the 73 delegates. Thank you so much for all that you've done for us. 72 delegates and 73 ECs have now something to look up to. With my sincere appreciation to the 72 ECs, I would like to conclude the final reflection. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nana and Yuta, for those kind words and great thoughts about the future of JASC. Like I said earlier, I'm so excited to see what you guys can put together as you guys push forward planning the next Japan America Student Conference. I know we are a little bit over time, but I promise me and Hayato will be brief with our closing remarks. Let us just say a few words and then we will conclude the 72nd Japan America Student Conference. So I'll be going first. Let me begin by thanking a few people who have made the last 2 days and in fact, the entire 72nd conference possible. Of course, I'll start by thanking Secretary Mineta again for joining us today and providing his wonderful insights. I believe that this was an experience that our delegation will remember for years to come. And it was truly an honor to hear you speak on your history and thoughts on the current state of affairs in America, as well as what we can do as student leaders going forward to leave the most positive mark on the world we can. Next, I would like to thank Ms. Linda Butcher of International Student Conferences Incorporated and Kono-san of the International Education Center, along with their staffs. I could not imagine how we would have put together this conference without your support and guidance that you provided as we took on this challenge of COVID head first. Next, thank you to our many supporters, sponsors, board members, and alumni for helping us to carry on the JASC tradition through this trying year. The JASC community is strong, and no year has better displayed that than 2020. Please know that your support throughout the year and even your presence here today does not go unnoticed. Next, thank you to my fellow executive committee members for all of your hard work to make this all possible. Of course, 15 months ago, when you ran for this position, there was no way to know what would have come our way, but I will be eternally grateful for your trust, commitment, and resiliency as we have sought to carry on this conference that we love so much. Finally, to all of the JASC 72 delegates, thank you for the incredible work that you have put forward over the last several months to make JASC 72 such a resounding success. You should be proud of all that you have accomplished, and I congratulate each of you as you transition from JASC delegates to alumni. Of course, no one was prepared for all the challenges that 2020 has brought, but I will say that through the hard work of everyone involved, JASC has yet again put forward a remarkable conference that carries on our tradition of pushing for peace and cultural understanding between our two great nations. JASC, however, does have another longstanding tradition. That's resiliency. Since 1934, students from around the US and Japan have been coming together to work towards a better future for everyone in our countries and around the world. Not a world war or a global pandemic or anything in between could stand in our way. My hope is that our program and community acts as a microcosm for the US-Japan relationship as a whole. That is, I hope and expect that the bond between our countries will continue to be peaceful and prosperous, despite the challenges that will inevitably face us along the way. Furthermore, as the world continues to fight the COVID pandemic and both Japan and the US transition into new administrations, I am confident that our strong bond will be a guiding example around the world and will be a beacon of hope for all of those who want to work towards a brighter, more peaceful future. Let me finish by saying that I have been incredibly honored with the opportunity not only to take part in JAS 72, but to help lead it as well. I can think of no more challenging and rewarding of an experience that I've had than the one I have had as an American Executive Committee member. I am sure that I will carry the lessons I have learned over the year with me for the rest of my life. And to all of those who have believed in me or helped me along the way, you have my deepest gratitude. It is said that once a JASKer, always a JASKer. And I can say with the utmost confidence that I look forward to carrying on that mantra myself. Now I will pass it off to my colleague and friend, the Japanese Executive Committee Chair, Hayato Kimura.
Thanks, Chris, for your wonderful speech as well as your kind introduction. As Chris said, definitely not the form in which we expected it to end in, but still, I believe we have ended the with a very strong video meeting. I'd first like to echo Chris in showing my deepest gratitude to our sponsors, supporters, and strong alumni community in both sides of the Pacific, helping through this difficult year. I'd also like to thank the International Students Conferences Incorporated, Ms. Linda Butcher, Nathaniel, and International Education Center, Kono-san, Ibe-san, and Goto-san, for all of your continuous and strong support, which enable us to continue striving to find the best way in the given circumstances to provide JAS 72. ECs delegates, well, you made it. Last day of the program as JAS 72. ECs, what can I say? I'm grateful that we have made this program together. And my deepest respect, as always, goes to Chris, my counterpart, for leading the conference with us. Lastly, I must thank all of you delegates for your restless effort and enthusiastic participants in the programs we prepared. As Yuta mentioned in his first speech, online conferences doesn't really seem that enthusiastic, but you followed us through, and you were definitely the ones that made this conference the best online conference that could possibly happen. This year's conference, when seen the bright side, has various traits in which past JASKers have never experienced. One, the conference duration was longer than any other JASK. No other JASK had its conference until November. What this means is that no other conferences have ever thought about your RTs or the meaning of your conference or the meaning of US-Japan relationships as long as you have. In addition, no other JAS has had the time to rethink after the summer conference as a delegate. 2, no other JAS had an opportunity for a delegate to understand and think this deep about other RTs as well as yourself. In the previous conferences, you simply did not have the time outside of the final forum to learn what other RTs are doing. Because that you had this opportunity, now you have multiple lenses that you can view the world through and deepen your curiosity. 3, you have experienced the best possible way to hold an online exchange of opinions. I am so proud in saying this. There is no other way that you would have this. By designing your own program, you know how to continue people to use their brains and exchange honest opinions amongst one another. My goal in making JAS 72 was to make the conference an eye-opening opportunity that challenged your own perspectives in a way that was accomplished for myself. And at the same time, I hope that this was for you as well. The question then is, where are you headed now? Brief time to share my personal thoughts. I couldn't wake up lately because I wasn't able to exchange thoughts with people. I enjoy talking with people and seeing their values. And personally, I'm excited to be able to talk to you in the near future on how you view the world and how that's been changing. Stay connected and never take your relationships for granted, as Princess Takamado said. I'm personally into making a revenge Jazz 72 in the States in the future. Definitely hope to see you all there. And to begin with, go ahead and continue on my attempts to expand the world, to discuss with you, and expand on my views that I could share with you all in the future. So, thank you so much for participating in this program, and I hope to see you soon.
And with that, we will conclude the 72nd edition of the Japan America Student Conference. Once again, thank you all for attending today, and my deepest apologies for going a bit over time. Please stay safe in these trying times, and we look forward to seeing you at next year's forum.